On this episode of On the Record, I'll take you inside the investigation behind one of the most violent cases I've reported on this year, the murder of Reno Caddo, stabbed 21 times inside an unlicensed group home in Goodyear. We break down what we've uncovered through newly obtained police records and why this tragedy should have been prevented. I'm Justin Lum, and we are On the Record. It has been called the largest scandal in Arizona state government. We are talking about the Access Medicaid fraud scandal worth $2.5 billion and the sober living crisis, the fallout that we have been reporting on extensively since 2023. Fox 10 investigator Justin Lum here, joined by Special Projects executive producer George Obi, and we have a special guest with us, Reva Stewart, representing the Turtle Island Women Warriors and Stolen People, Stolen Benefits. You have been a major advocate for Indigenous people, vulnerable people who have been victimized in unlicensed and even licensed sober living homes throughout the state, who have come from different states outside of Arizona. We have talked about Montana, North Dakota, Alaska. The list goes on. New Mexico, of course, is a big one. We're following up on the latest investigation we did last night regarding the murder of Reno Caddo. Let's just start with, your reaction to what we found through these new records. You've been following this case since the beginning as well. Just seeing everything unfold in real time that night. What is that like?
It was horrifying to watch. It was horrifying because you see what happened that should have never happened to begin with.
Yeah, it's graphic, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but the suspect, Glenn Peaches, arrested on a murder charge that's now a first-degree murder charge, and from the beginning, when we got the Form 4, we knew that this was, once we saw the word group home, we were like, okay, we got to dig into this. And the background on this clinic, known as the Academy Behavioral Health and Wellness Clinic, to be clear, not under a criminal investigation, not even suspended by Access, but definitely licensed with the Department of Health. The issue here, and it's brought up in the police report by Goodyear, is that the home that was being used for the clients is not licensed. The clinic is a whole different entity, but let's just talk about how we started getting into, what is this place, where are they located, and how does this work?
Initially, I think on the surface, this was a crime involving two individuals who got into a fight, right? Just on the surface. And then once we started digging deeper, we realized that these were not just run-of-the-mill individuals who were living in the same home. We uncovered quickly that there were multiple people living in this home who were essentially being cared for and were supposed to be receiving services for substance abuse, whether that was alcohol or drugs. And that immediately set off our radar of, okay, we've seen this before. We've seen homes like this all over the valley, not just Goodyear, being used for this purpose. But again, as you mentioned, there are rules in place to make sure that these individuals are getting the services and getting the help that they need. And as we have uncovered in a number of cases, much like we found here, that wasn't the case. They were not getting the help that they needed. And then we learned that there were certain individuals in this home who should not have been here to begin with.
Yeah, and I think that's what we want to know more about. In this case, Glenn Peaches is a convicted felon who had served 20 years for manslaughter. I don't know if you know, but is it common for these sober living homes and or group homes to have people from all walks of life who may have criminal records? I mean, how do you vet that, and what do you do? I feel like it's a sort of a gray area when it comes to management and oversight for safety reasons.
I think with the fraudulent homes not being the sober living homes that they play out to be, it should vet, but at the same time they're not vetting because they're just allowing anybody in there that has either the American Indian Health Plan, a Medicaid plan, or a Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare plan, Aetna plan.
That's the key, right? Access. And we're here years later in 2025 and we're still talking about access plans, even though there was this widespread crackdown, hundreds of providers suspended, but those weren't homes, those were outpatient,
IOPs.
treatment centers, the clinics that you might see in a plaza, a suite, that type of thing. Not the homes almost seem to still be like ghost homes.
Mhm.
People are being moved from home to home, and that was the case here because we had spoken to the academy, the owner, and said we had just moved there into that Goodyear home 10 days prior. So how would anybody even know that these people existed and what was happening? That's the hard part.
Exactly. And I continue to bring that up every chance I get, that a lot of these intensive outpatient programs umbrella these homes. And these homes, I call them flyby homes because they can shut down and move to another home. So there's no oversight with these flyby homes whatsoever. And there were two laws that were passed in 2017 that came into law in 2018 and 2019 that talks about patient brokering and also trafficking. And there's no oversight. And I was reading that there haven't been any arrests from 2018 to 2023 under these laws.
Wow, that is so interesting. And that keyword, that term, patient brokering, that is something that we have researched as well. I do remember the one case. Was it last year? Or has it been more than a year? With the bishop from
Mhm.
California,
Yeah.
Robert
Okay.
Kayongo, who it was sort of an undercover sting, and he was arrested for allegations of patient brokering. Attorney General Mays's office basically prosecuted that case, and at this point, it has not finished its adjudication yet. But from the court records that we remember on that one, he'd been going to behavioral health facilities, basically saying, I have this many people,
Mhm.
according to these allegations. And that's where the patient brokering allegation comes from. Back to Caddo's case. So this happened April 12th, 2025, not too long ago. And we filed the records request. Sometimes this takes months just to give people insight into the investigation. You know this as well. Like, you can look up certain things on the Department of Health through Access, but getting body cam footage, 911 audio, police report, we got about 260 pages. It was only about a couple of months, so it was a nice surprise to get this back, because sometimes it can take years.
It can, and Goodyear specifically has been dealing with these type of cases for the last couple of years, as have many cities. They've all kind of communicated since they were all made aware of this type of stuff going on in their cities, and they've been playing catch up. And so when you have a case like this, we submit a records request. It is nice to see them address it quickly, understand the importance of it. Obviously, this case still needs to play its way through court, right?
Yeah.
Caddo still needs to have his day in court. But I think from law enforcement, I think, want to get a message out there that they understand that there's still a problem. Despite the moratorium, despite the efforts from the state, this is still an issue. And we see, I think for the public anyway, we see why it's so important. Even on this case, I mean, we've profiled a number of them, but when you see it from law enforcement's perspective, when they go into a home, and as we saw in the body camera, these homes were basically empty, right? We noticed when we first saw the body cam, the walking right in, there was very little furniture. There were mattresses on the floor. It gave a very temporary feel that you almost suspected the people living in here know they're not going to be here for long. They're either going to get moved from home to home, which, as we've spoken before, that is the MO. But you know that these folks probably don't want to be there anyway for very long. And so it's important, I think, for law enforcement to share this, for us to show it, and explain to the people at home why this isn't how it's supposed to be.
So the alleged house manager called 911 and said, there was a fight or that someone was beating someone up. I don't even think he knew it was a stabbing at first, and you could tell the fear in his voice. And he said that, this is a sober living home. So we heard multiple terms: sober living, group home. Police respond. I want to warn people that it is a little bit graphic as they arrive contact Glenn Peaches and make the arrest in the bathroom. Let's take a look at the first minute or so.
Good man. Hurry up. Take one outside. Come on. Where are you bleeding from?
From my wrist.
That's a wound. You have a tourniquet right here?
Yeah, you got him?
I'm bleeding right there.
320 we got one body upstairs and another male with injuries. So I believe those are suspects.
Hey man, is it alright if you get some clothes really quick and you go downstairs? Please. I'm gonna bring it out.
So shortly after that, Peaches was arrested. He was injured a little bit too, was bleeding, but they get his name. He identifies himself. At this point, you can tell officers just responding to a terrible incident. There's an emergency. They try to give CPR to Reno Caddo, but he was stabbed 21 times. We didn't really have a number. We knew several times until the report had the medical examiner's statement saying that he had 21 stab wounds. I mean, this is one of the most violent cases you've seen come out of this crisis.
I believe this is the most violent, this one here, and for them to see the amount of blood all over, it's just horrible.
Yeah, and we then learned that he had the record for the manslaughter conviction, served 20 years, and was released in 2023. And I'm sure other clients may have had records or histories and whatnot. But what stood out through the police report and an image that was also in the report was this text message that he sent out to someone, a friend, saying, "I killed another guy." He doesn't bring up self-defense like he does later to police regarding this fight that happened, that he says happened, but he straight up says, "I killed another guy."
Yeah, and you see him, we profiled it in the report as the officer is walking upstairs into the bathroom area. You see him on the phone, and that is, in theory, when he was texting about what he had just done. And then we learned in his interaction with authorities and even witnesses who were there in the home, there was, according to them, never any indication that these two had beef, that there was never an incident where, they felt like anybody was in danger. But then you listen to his statements to police afterwards, and you start to get a clear picture that clearly he was battling demons and then self-medicating, as some of them were, with alcohol and drugs. And I think the outside of the text message, if you watch that body camera, officers, it's very tough for them to kind of recognize immediately what's going on, but they clearly know that there's somebody injured on the ground upstairs next to the bathroom, and then you have a bloody scene like that. And his demeanor, I mean, you don't even need to listen to it if you just watch. Caddo's in there, Peaches is in there, almost, I don't want to say in shock, but obviously not comprehending exactly what he's done. If you're texting someone that you've done it, but you're calm, you're cleaning your hands, most normal people, even sober, don't typically react in that fashion. When Reva, I'll ask you, you've spoken to a lot of people who have been in these homes. The fear of something like this happening, I would imagine, isn't top of mind for them. That their idea is to go into these homes and receive help. But as we found, they're not only not getting that help, their addiction is almost being preyed upon, if you will, by plying them or allowing them this freedom to drink and do drugs. When that is their vice, that's what they're there to get help for. That's got to be frustrating.
It is very frustrating because it's ongoing. It's the fact that they prey on our people to bring them into these homes and allow them, here's a pill, come back, here's some alcohol, come back, just come back for the evening and we'll take care of you. So, or they offer them, free steak dinner. As you see, a free home with just air mattresses all over the floor. That's not a home. That's not anything to make you feel comfortable. So a lot of our Native relatives that have been in these homes know that they're going to be transported to another home, transported if they don't do as the house manager or the owner of that home says. So if they say something and ask a question, this is wrong, and then they'll get kicked out.
I think it goes without saying this is the worst case scenario, because we've covered a number of these homes where there isn't a violent end to anything. But at the overall issue here would be that these individuals who are seeking help aren't getting what they need, because most of them aren't violent when they're under the influence. But as we've learned, in fact, I think one of the first stories we did involved an individual who was, I think, seeking help, was preyed upon, but ended up drinking themselves to death before they could get the help they need. Again, didn't hurt anybody other than themselves, but they were unfortunately allowed to hurt themselves. And that was one of the first cases we covered in this saga.
That was Western Enclave.
Enclave, yes. Western
And
Enclave.
Carson Leslie, I remember his
Yes.
name, was being driven
from Flagstaff.
From Flagstaff, and had already, drank himself to death on the ride to this home. And it just boggles your mind of why did he have a bottle in his hand? In this case, the report says that Reno and Glenn were drinking Captain Morgan together, and they started having disagreements. And that's when Peaches said that he fought him and had to defend himself because Caddo was talking mess. Now, no excuse for that. These are the most vulnerable people who are living in these homes. I'm going to tell you right now that the records in this report says that Peaches had an anxiety disorder, major depression disorder, alcohol abuse, and opioid abuse. Caddo had anxiety disorder, PTSD, again, alcohol abuse, inadequate housing, food insecurity, unemployment, and then something about cannabis dependence. So both people, obviously, we know these are people that are dealing with things, and that's the whole issue at hand. Do you feel like this so-called house manager, is that even a real employee, or just someone's also living there with their own issues?
A lot of the house managers that are in these homes were recruited by the owners here. You can be a house manager if you take care of the house. And a lot of them do have their own addictions as well. I've come across so many of our people that have been house managers in these homes. And when they asked a question, they about the legitimacy of it, then they would get kicked out.
That's a loose title. Mm-hmm. You're in charge.
Exactly.
This house not even licensed for any of this type of activity. And so that seems like one of the major problems that's never been fixed. And then accountability-wise, we were trying to figure out, okay, who's in charge. Department of Health's website didn't even seem to be updated, or there's an error because they had a different LLC on the license from November 2024. And we called, and that person that runs that entity says, we moved out. It's a closed license. And now it's this Academy of Behavioral Health and Wellness that's not licensed. So the checks and balances, the communication between entity, LLC, provider, whatnot, and the state, that seems to be always lagging behind.
Well, and as we learned, I think most notably Mesa with Canal on Baseline. The city of Mesa had rules regarding group homes, but they relied on those homes and the public to notify them where these homes were. There were rules that you couldn't have too many homes in a small area, but there was no communication really with the state health department and the city of Mesa. So you do have, as we've learned, these cracks in the system where the state doesn't know where any of these homes are. The city is, some cities have a limited knowledge, but at the end of the day, they don't know exactly where they are. And in order for them to be reported, you need a tip. You need a call. You need somebody to say.
Neighbors and residents to speak up, yeah.
And that's not always, that doesn't always work, as we've seen. And so you feel like there's been more communication. But even as we learned, then you have county jurisdiction. You have areas where the county is overseeing these. They don't have a clear indication of where these homes are. Are they a group home, sober living home? Is it a halfway house? And then, what you're allowed to do and not do. As you mentioned, a house manager, being a manager of anything is a challenge, but being a manager of a home where you have people battling addiction, I could be wrong, but I would feel like you would want some training. You would want somebody, even if they're a former addict themselves, very relatable, but that still doesn't make you qualified to manage individuals especially individuals who haven't beat their addiction.
And we don't know exactly what can you do when someone has a knife in their hands. Like, that's a scary thing too. So whether you're trained or not, you are already now in a dangerous situation. I guess at that moment, the right thing, call 911, which is what this person did. It was too late, sadly, and because of 21 stab wounds. We also learned that, according to the clinic owner or CEO, they were adamant this is not a group home, and claimed that clients paid $100 in rent, and access wasn't involved. But then you had witnesses who had been a part of this clinic and say, yeah, well, we do rely on our access funding, and we don't have to pay rent, because most of them, I would think that employment is an issue, right? So it's like the money has to come from somewhere. And they had moved from a Levine home, so that can also be the issue of we can't make the rent. Got to get to a new place. And so now they're in the responsibility and depending on this person or whoever it is that's offering them help. They don't want to be on the streets. You've seen this firsthand.
I have. I've seen it, and it's just a hamster wheel at this point where we can, say who is at fault. I think it's the state of Arizona are not enforcing these laws. The two laws that were created in 2018, 2019. No one is enforcing that, so all of these homes are going to continue to keep popping up if nobody does anything.
Meanwhile, Access will still pay the providers, maybe not on time, maybe it takes a while, a lot longer than it used to before the crackdown. They'll still pay them as long as there's no red flags of fraudulent billing. It's not their issue worrying about the home. That's a Department of Health thing as far as inspections. But how do you know a home's not licensed if you don't even know about the home and who's there? So it goes back to the people that need to make complaints. And even then, that takes time to get a response.
But if you're under Access, they would have a list of who is under what plan on the Medicaid plan. So Access would have that list of who's, and DHS would have a list of who their, where their people, where the clients would be, even
so
if
there
it's
is a way, documentation, there's communication that can be had. Saying, these are who we have accounted for that are Access members. Yeah, that's true. And we talked to Reno's family. Obviously, they're struggling not just with the fact of the stabbing and, finding out that their brother just died so suddenly, but why did this even happen? Here's what Reno's sister, Reva Caddo, had to say about this home.
We're still asking that question as why did this treatment facility allow them to consume alcohol? And why didn't they have rules and regulations in place that sort of protected these individuals from that? A lot of them go to these treatment facilities to get help, and my brother was one of them. We weren't able to help him. It just had a tragic ending. It's very hard to deal with, and it's very hard to come to terms with the fact that he's not here anymore.
So far, Glenn Peaches has pleaded not guilty to the charge of first-degree murder. He has the manslaughter conviction on his record, and the state has not noticed yet that they'll seek the death penalty. But that could happen when you have aggravators like that. You have a criminal record, so that doesn't bring Caddo back. Obviously, there still needs to be a trial that's set for December 2025. So, justice, the wheels of justice turn slow. He's pleaded guilty, like I said, but even broader, this sober living crisis. We've talked about reform ever since we've been covering this. What is the answer? Who has the solution? And so far, we have one piece of legislation that's been passed and signed into law, and that was Senate Bill 1308. You've been vocal about this. Is this going to be something that actually addresses the issues? Because from what I read, it's just sober living homes regulation. Like we're talking about, we still are trying to figure out what exactly was this in Goodyear, and how does this? What's your perspective on this?
With this Senate Bill 1308, it was amended from that Senate Bill 13-3730. So the Senate Bill 3730 that came into law in 2018 of August, this is just an amendment off of
The
that.
revised,
Yeah, it's a
updated
revised, updated
version.
So it just comes back to the patient brokering with this other law, the 36-2065, and that's the referral. You know, no IOPs should be out there referring clients to their IOPs and paying them, because that's illegal too. That's also a form of trafficking. So that it just goes back to these laws need to be enforced.
It said that there would be more, or there should be with this law, more inspections, regular inspections by the Department of Health. But I'm just still trying to figure out, the question for me is, if the home has not even been reported as a licensed sober living home, if it's working unlicensed, you can't stop people necessarily from doing that when they're so mobile.
Well, and to that point, I don't know that any of these bills or the laws would have prevented Reno's murder, right? Like, we don't know, even if this home had been licensed and supervised, at the end of the day, this murder was clearly, you know, the impact that it had on those two individuals battling addiction, who, like you said, were drunk at the time. I don't know that any of this would have prevented that, but I think we know there are many layers to this, and there are responsibility across all agencies, whether it's billing fraud, whether it's finding out where these homes are, who's managing them, who's overseeing them, and then at the end of the day, you still have people who I think need addiction help in an environment different than, say, others. Like, there are some people who need more help than others. They're battling multiple addictions, multiple demons, whether it's mental health, physical. Again, we know that this model, this type of fraud, has been around for over a decade now. We know that it first started with private insurance. Then they started defrauding the state. Now we're learning, because the states cracked down, some of them are going back to private insurance. You could close that loophole, but as you pointed out, there is still a bigger issue with vulnerable individuals who need help somewhere, whether that's from the state, private, whatever. They need help. Some need more help than others. They need to be in an environment that is conducive to providing that kind of help. Maybe that would have prevented Reno's murder. When we can talk a lot about the fraud and all of that stuff, but to your point, the help that these people needs to come from professionals, not just house managers monitoring them, allowing them to sit around the house all day, taking online classes. And where is that help going to come from, I guess, is the question. Whether that's from the state, from the tribes, who needs to step up and put forth a plan that will allow the most vulnerable and those who are heavily addicted, where are they going to get the help from?
I believe the tribal nations should all step up, because a lot of our Native relatives that were targeted are tribal members. Mm-hmm. So if all the tribal nations, not just in Arizona, but we got Montana, Alaska, you know, all the tribal nations stepped up and did something about this, that would make a big difference if they set up facilities on the reservations, not in city because they're bringing them into the city, but on the reservations, and start there. And it's a lot of traditional healing as well that they need. Of course, you have to go through detox to begin with. So first, you know, do detox. There are detox centers that have been sending our Native relatives down here and from out of state. So what they need to do is keep it on the reservations, you know, for our tribal members to get help there.
Is it fair to say then a generational issue that starts from the beginning? It could be, people are going to want to know the root cause of a lot of this, because these aren't children, right? These are adults who have been battling addiction for quite a while. Do we need to go back and look at the generational system and start from the very beginning when they're younger, whether it's access to drugs and alcohol on the reservation?
It is. It's called generational trauma.
Yeah.
It is very much so, because you have a lot of domestic violence, you know, murder and abuse on the reservations. If you just, face that and then go from there and learn how to live with that. And that's a lot of, through a lot of mental health.
And you've obviously, we're 3-4 years into this this saga, if you will. Obviously, we know that this has been around for a while, but in the last 3 or 4 years, I'm just curious your impression now that more tribes have started to take notice and have started to pay attention to their members going missing, ending up in places they shouldn't be. Where do you think they are in those early stages of trying to create reform and create change from within the reservation? I'm just curious where you think they are right now.
I think a lot of the tribal nations are still lacking. Unfortunately, I know that Montana has really stepped it up with their behavioral health systems there. And our tribes down here in Arizona, I've seen some progress, but not enough progress, because at the end of the day, it's just like, okay, well, we're going to concentrate on this issue, not so much this issue, when we need to address this issue right now.
I think we can talk about it now. It's been a while. What do you remember about the end of Operation Rainbow Bridge? I haven't seen any update in a long time. I mean, just by going online, you don't see anything really since 2023. It was very reactive, and it was a lot of public unification between the state of Arizona, this tribe, Navajo Nation, your tribe.
Yes.
And the response and looking for people who have been displaced. And we saw that, and it looked great on paper. But since then, you haven't seen that outreach.
I have absolutely not seen Operation Rainbow Bridge. They came down at the beginning when this first blew up, and they said they were going to be there. They did a few outreaches. I think it was for a month or 2 weeks. And then when we needed to help, when we wanted them to help our people, they said, well, we don't have jurisdiction. So from that point on, it was like they piggybacked off the government. We would call them, hey, we have somebody who needs some help. And then they would say, well, call 211, option 7 at that time, I believe. And since then, I've had a few people off of Operation Rainbow Bridge that no longer works for them and apologize for what had happened, because I know for a fact that they had only reported 10 people going home that they helped during that time.
Wow. And you have helped, how many people have you helped get home?
I believe we're over 1,500 people since
1,500 people.
1,500 people.
That's a lot of different states, too.
We had 3 in Alaska and quite a few in Montana, all the way from the Dakotas to both Dakotas, Kansas. It was just quite a few.
And I would imagine a lot of those people were they aware of where they were? Were they aware of what was happening? I'm assuming they were receptive.
They were. With all the reports that I took, a lot of them told me that they were recruited off the reservations. They were told that, well, we're going to help you, with your addictions, or we got a free home. Some of them were families that didn't have an addiction. So they were brought down, and we're going to take care of you, even with the colleges.
They want to get off the reservation.
Yes, they want. We're going to give you a free home. That was, and you had instances where some of these families stayed in there for 2 years. They were being for 2 years.
As long as they got signed up on Access.
As long as they got signed up under the American Indian Health Plan. And I think it's every 6 months they would be told to say that they had relapsed in order to keep billing.
When you do outreach now, how common is it to hear that they have been signed up on Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, private, the marketplace?
It's very common. And you can go, when we do outreach and we go out there, you can actually see them actively recruiting. It'll only take 5 minutes to sign this up, and we'll help you. But in 30 days, go ahead and cancel that. They don't have the option to cancel. So they get billed by the end of the year on their taxes when they do file taxes. So,
and their Medicaid is affected as well, because it's not the primary insurer.
Yes, the American Indian Health Plan has become secondary. So when that happens and you don't cancel, let's say, Blue Cross Blue Shield, then you can't do anything. You can't reach out for help. You have to use the Blue Cross Blue Shield that you've already exhausted.
And the person who has recruited them, the alleged bad actors here, don't have to worry about waiting for months to get paid from Access because they know that door is shut.
Yeah.
And hence that's what we've been seeing. The last time we did a really major project, you were a big part of our Sober Truth documentary. Just what is the next thing to look at deeper now that we just touched a little bit on the private part, but like looking ahead?
Looking ahead, I still would like to have accountability for all our Native people. I would love to see more of this out there, not to hide it and say, well, it's not a problem, because you see a lot of that. Oh, I thought this was over a year ago. It's not over.
It's not over.
It's not over whatsoever. So I know that there is a documentary coming out with, what was that? National Geographic. And that should be out the end of the month, I think, of July. So
that you were featured on heavily, and they got to. I think that's good that you see national. I wouldn't call them national media, but you have such a big operation like that, bigger than local news crews, I would say, as I know, and they get to go into 51st Avenue Baseline with you
and
see what you do, and it's a whole new world for them, and they're coming in. You're able to educate them.
And that's what we continue to do, even to this day. Like a couple of weeks ago, we did outreach, and we were still educating security guards and police officers of what's going on, because now they're seeing a lot more missing people out there. It's almost the same as it was 3 years ago when this first started.
Yeah.
It's still the same. So we have to going to continue to educate, continue to keep this out there.
And you can believe that this case with Reno Caddo, I mean, that's another learning experience, a tragic one for Goodyear Police that maybe 3 to 5 years ago didn't understand what they were walking into. Now it's very apparent. They know what a sober living home looks like in the signs to look for. So
yeah, I was shocked at how many local agencies were kind of behind the curve and were shocked that this kind of thing, I think like a lot of us were, that this was allowed to happen for so long with very little action. And so, and not making excuses for law enforcement, but obviously there were a number of scenes that they came across and dealing with a number of people not quite understanding the scope of what was going on. And these calls for service at these locations, clearly there's no training necessarily involved. But you guys, I think, were key in that. You were relaying to them what you're seeing, what you're hearing from people, and that sometimes feels like, for them anyway, the best way to really tap into what's happening is advocates like yourself who are on the ground speaking with people, or people who are willing to speak with you, right? Because I think that's the connection you make, is it's relatable, or they have some sort of trust in you, whereas somebody in uniform or with a badge, they may not get that same level of trust.
Exactly. When we do go out and do outreach, a lot of them see our vest, and they know that we're there to help. And if we can get them the help, it's whether it's going home, we'll work on that, or if they need help, a legitimate facility, we'll offer that. But some of these homes, these fraudulent homes, have really played mind games on our Native relatives to where they only know that these homes are considered sober living homes. They get to do what they want. There's no structure.
Yeah.
So when they don't have that, or when they do get the structure, they don't know how to react to it, and they feel like they're being forced to do it.
Almost more of a battle that way than it would be to just fight your addiction.
It's a reverse mindset.
Exactly.
They think that what's good for them is something that's not good for them. That's something very bad. Reva, thank you so much for your work and what you do. Appreciate you coming here to talk to us about, our latest report and sort of what we need to look deeper at next.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, so I encourage you all to watch this report if you have not, or read it on fox10phoenix.com. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications for more of our in-depth investigative work on Fox 10. We will see you next time on The Record.